Moving into a new neighborhood is supposed to be a fresh start, right? New house, new neighbors, maybe even some peace and quiet. That's exactly what I was hoping for when I bought a cozy little home in a suburban neighborhood just outside the city. After years on the force, I was done with chaos. No more late-night stakeouts, no more high-speed chases, no more dealing with crooks who thought they were smarter than the law. I was ready to enjoy my retirement. Too bad my new HOA had other plans. It started just 3 days after I moved in. I was out front, unloading a few last boxes from my truck, when I noticed a woman marching down the sidewalk toward me like she was leading a parade of one. Mid-50s, stiff posture, a visor that screamed, "I take myself way too seriously," and a clipboard clutched in her talon-like hands. She didn't introduce herself, just stopped in front of me and started talking like I'd interrupted her day. "You're the new homeowner," she said, more accusation than statement. I wiped sweat off my forehead. "Yep, that's me. I'm Linda Cartwright. I'm the president of the HOA," she announced, with the smug confidence of someone expecting applause. I just nodded. I'd dealt with power-tripping types before. Cops called them badges without the badge. Give them the tiniest bit of authority, and they'd wield it like a medieval warlord. Linda gave my house a once-over, pursed her lips, then jotted something on her clipboard. "You did read the HOA guidelines before purchasing, correct?" I skimmed them, I admitted. That wasn't entirely true. I'd looked them over, but nothing stood out as ridiculous. Just the usual stuff. Don't let your grass turn into a jungle. Don't paint your house neon green. Don't summon demons in your backyard. Okay, that last one wasn't in there, but it wouldn't have shocked me if it was. Linda didn't like my answer. Her mouth pinched tighter. "Then you should be aware that there are already multiple violations on your property." That got my attention. "Come again." She tapped her clipboard. "First, you have an unauthorized vehicle in the driveway." I glanced at my truck, then back at her. "That's my truck. Trucks are not permitted as primary vehicles in driveways. They must be stored in a garage or off-site." I snorted. "That's ridiculous." Her lips thinned. "It's in the guidelines. Secondly, your lawn is overgrown. We require grass to be maintained at a maximum of 3 inches. I looked at my lawn. Was it perfect? No, but I'd moved in 3 days ago. It wasn't like I was letting it turn into a jungle. Third, she continued, flipping a page, "there's an unauthorized structure in your backyard." I frowned. "What structure?" "The shed." I had to laugh. That shed was here before I bought the house. She didn't even blink. "It's not registered with the HOA. I exhaled slowly. "So, let me get this straight. You're telling me I owe fines for a truck in my driveway, grass that's barely long, and a shed that came with the property?" "That's correct." She smiled now, but it wasn't a friendly one. It was the kind of smile people gave before trying to sell you a lemon disguised as a luxury car. I crossed my arms. "And how much are these fines?" She flipped back a page. $150 for the truck, $75 for the lawn, and $200 for the unregistered structure. A total of $425. I let out a slow whistle. Wow, that's impressive. Charging me for stuff that isn't even my fault. "The fines are non-negotiable," she said, like she was daring me to argue. "They must be paid within 14 days. I stared at her for a long moment, then said, "Yeah, that's not happening." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me. I'm not paying for nonsense." I gestured toward my house. "That shed? It's been here for years. The truck? I own my driveway. And the grass? I just moved in. I haven't even had time to buy a lawnmower." Linda's face darkened. "The HOA has rules. If you refuse to comply, additional fines will be added." I sighed. "Look, Linda, I just moved in. How about we start over? I get it, you've got a job to do, but maybe ease up a little? I'll cut the grass this weekend, and I'll check the bylaws about the shed." Her expression didn't change. If the fines are not paid, the HOA has the right to take further action. That got a chuckle out of me. "Oh yeah? Like what?" "We can place a lien on your property." That was a big threat for a first conversation. Most HOAs at least pretended to be friendly before going full tyrant. But I dealt with plenty of bullies before, and I knew their type well. The trick was knowing when to push back. I stepped a little closer, lowering my voice. "Linda, Let me give you a little friendly advice. She tilted her chin up. I don't need advice. Sure you do, I said. See, before I retired, I spent over 20 years as a cop. I know scams when I see them. And I know intimidation tactics. You're trying to shake me down for money I don't know. That makes me real curious about how many other people you've pulled this on. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Hesitation, maybe even worry. I smiled. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to read through those HOA bylaws. If I find anything shady, I'll be making some calls. And if you try to harass me again, I'll start digging into your records. Do we understand each other? She stiffened. Are you threatening me? I grinned. Not at all. Just letting you know I'm not the kind of guy you can push around. For a moment, I thought she might back down. But then she squared her shoulders, plastered that fake smile back on, and said, We'll see about that. With that, she turned and marched off. I watched her go, exhaling slowly. This was not how I wanted to start my new life. But if Linda thought I was going to roll over and let her extort me, she was in for a surprise. Because I had a feeling this was just the beginning. I had barely settled into my new place, and already I had a problem on my hands. Linda, the HOA president from hell, had come at me swinging with a list of bogus fines, hoping I'd just roll over and pay up. Too bad for her, I wasn't wired that way. After our little chat, I spent the evening doing exactly what I told her I would, digging into the HOA's bylaws. I made myself a stiff drink, sat down at my desk, and flipped through the 40-page document that came with my closing papers. Most of it was the usual HOA nonsense. Rules about house colors, fence height, and when you could put out your trash cans. But then I got to the section about violations and fines. And that's when things got interesting. According to the HOA's own rules, first-time violations were supposed to come with a written warning, not an immediate fine. But Linda had skipped that step entirely. Strike one. Then I found something even better. The shed in my backyard was registered. It was listed in a section about grandfathered structures, meaning it had been approved years ago. Linda's claim that it was unauthorized. Complete garbage. Strike two. And the kicker? The rule about trucks being banned from driveways only applied to commercial vehicles. My pickup wasn't a work truck, it was my personal ride. Meaning Linda had either misread the rule or was flat out lying. Strike three. I leaned back in my chair, grinning. This was even easier than I thought. Linda had overplayed her hand, assuming I was just another pushover homeowner who'd blindly cough up cash. But I'd spent years taking down con artists, liars, and crooks. She wasn't as smart as she thought. And now, I had proof. The next morning, I had planned to mow my lawn, mostly to remove any excuse Linda had to keep harassing me. But when I stepped outside, I saw something taped to my front door. A violation notice. I pulled it off and scanned it. Violation notice. Failure to comply with HOA regulations has resulted in the following fines. Refusal to remove unauthorized structure, $200. Repeat parking violation, $150. Failure to maintain landscaping, $75. Late payment penalty, $50. Total due, $475. I stared at the paper. Not only had they duplicated the original fines, but they had also added a late fee for less than 24 hours. I exhaled slowly. All right, Linda, you want to play? Let's play. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on the notice. It rang twice before a sugary sweet voice answered. This is Linda Cartwright, HOA president. Linda, I said, it's your favorite new homeowner. A pause. Then, Mr. Thompson, I assume you're calling to make your payment? I laughed. Not even close. I'm calling because you just tacked on more bogus fines, and I'd like an explanation. She didn't miss a beat. As I explained before, our HOA has strict guidelines. Yeah. I read them last night. And guess what? You're full of it. Silence. Then, excuse me. I leaned against my truck, smirking. Your own bylaws say first-time violations require a written warning. I never got one. The shed? It's grandfathered in. And the truck rule? That only applies to commercial vehicles. So, tell me, Linda, are you scamming me, or are you just really bad at your job? There was a long pause. When she finally spoke again, her voice was ice. Mr. Thompson, I suggest you reconsider your tone. Disrespect toward the HOA board will not be tolerated. I let out a low whistle. Wow, you really don't like being called out, do you? She ignored that. If you refuse to pay, further action will be taken. Yeah? Like what? As I said before, the HOA has the authority to place a lien on your property. I chuckled. Go ahead and try. See how that works out for you. You're making a very big mistake, she said, her voice dripping with venom. I suggest you think carefully before escalating this any further. I grinned. Oh, Linda, you have no idea who you're dealing with. And with that, I hung up. It was clear now that Linda wasn't just power-hungry. She was running a full-on racket. I had no doubt she'd been scamming other homeowners the same way, bullying them into paying fake fines with threats of legal action. So I did what any good detective would do. I started asking questions. I spent the afternoon walking around the neighborhood, casually introducing myself to other homeowners. And the more people I talked to, the more dirt I uncovered. Linda had been president for 5 years, and in that time, fines had gone through the roof. Several neighbors had paid mystery fines for rule violations they didn't even know existed. Nobody had ever seen a financial report. The HOA was supposed to disclose where all the money went, but Linda kept everything under wraps. And the best part? There was no actual management company. Everything was handled by Linda and a couple of her hand-picked board members. No oversight. No accountability. I was starting to get a very clear picture. Linda wasn't just a control freak. She was embezzling money from the HOA. And she'd just picked the wrong guy to try and scam. I was wrapping up my little investigation when one of my neighbors, an older guy named Frank, stopped me in my driveway. You're messing with the HOA, huh? He said, lowering his voice. I grinned. Looks that way. Frank glanced around, then leaned in. Watch yourself. A few years back, a guy down the street tried to fight back. Next thing he knew, his car was getting towed, his mailbox got accidentally knocked over, and his fines doubled. I raised an eyebrow. She pulled that. He nodded. She's got people wrapped around her finger. Don't underestimate her. I patted him on the shoulder. I appreciate the warning, Frank. But trust me, she picked the wrong target this time. Sure enough, the very next morning, I woke up to find a tow truck in my driveway. They were hooking up my pickup. I stormed outside. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? A skinny guy in a grease-stained shirt looked up. This truck's been reported for unauthorized parking. I clenched my jaw. By who? The HOA. I pulled out my phone. I'd put that tow cable down if I were you. The guy hesitated. Look, man, I'm just doing my job. You're about to tow a legally parked vehicle based on a fraudulent claim. That's called grand theft auto. I flipped my wallet open, showing my retired police ID. You want to get arrested today? His eyes went wide. Put it down. He didn't need to be told twice. He unhooked my truck and muttered an apology before driving off. I watched him go, fists clenched. All right, Linda, that's how you want to play it? Game on. Linda had crossed the line. It was one thing to slap me with fake fines, but trying to have my legally parked truck towed? That was outright fraud. And worse, if I hadn't caught them in the act, I would have been the one on the hook for impound fees. She wasn't just scamming homeowners. She was abusing her power to bully people into submission. So, I did what any retired cop with a sense of justice would do. I decided to take her down. First, I needed proof. It wasn't enough to suspect Linda was running a racket. I needed hard evidence to bring to the authorities. Step 1. Document everything. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of every violation notice, every fine, and, most importantly, the HOA's own bylaws, which proved Linda was making up rules. Step 2. Find the victims. I went door to door, talking to every neighbor who'd been hit with bogus fines. Some were hesitant to talk, scared of retaliation. But once I explained what I was doing, they started opening up. Frank's mailbox had been mysteriously damaged after he questioned a fine. Sarah, a single mom down the street, had been threatened with foreclosure over an unpaid fine she didn't even know about. An elderly couple had paid nearly $3,000 in landscaping violations despite having a lawn service. It was a pattern: intimidation, fraudulent fines, and no oversight. Step 3. Follow the money. HOAs are legally required to disclose financial records to homeowners upon request. I found this little gem buried in the bylaws. So, I sent a polite but firm email to Linda requesting a copy of all HOA financial statements for the last 5 years. Her response? Silence. I sent a second request. This time, I got a reply from the HOA treasurer, a guy named Paul who was basically Linda's lackey. He claimed the records were unavailable due to ongoing administrative adjustments. Translation? They were cooking the books. That was all I needed. See, one of the perks of being a retired cop is that you make friends in the right places. And I happened to have a good buddy, Mike, who worked as a fraud investigator for the county. I gave him a call. Hey Mike, got a fun one for you. Ever looked into an HOA for financial fraud? He chuckled. Oh boy, what did they do? I gave him the rundown. Fake fines, missing financial records, intimidation tactics. His response? Oh yeah, that smells like embezzlement. Bingo. He agreed to look into it. But while he was doing that, I had another call to make, this one to my lawyer. I wasn't just going to sit around and wait. I wanted Linda to dig her own grave. So, I baited her. I sent one last email, this time refusing to pay any fines and formally requesting a hearing with the HOA board. According to the bylaws, homeowners had the right to dispute fines before an official HOA hearing. I knew Linda wouldn't want that, because that meant putting her scam under scrutiny. Sure enough, within hours, I got another violation notice taped to my door. Unauthorized lawn height, $100. Failure to pay fines, $200. Non-compliance with HOA directives, $300. Total, $600. And at the bottom, in bold letters, final warning, failure to comply will result in legal action. I laughed out loud. Linda had just made a huge mistake, because now, it was time to bring in the law. Linda thought she had me cornered. She probably imagined me sweating over that final warning, worried about legal action. But what she didn't realize was, I'd just set her up. By issuing another fraudulent fine after I formally requested a hearing, which she conveniently ignored, Linda had just violated the HOA's own bylaws. That meant she wasn't just breaking rules. She was opening the HOA up to real legal consequences. And I wasn't going to let her slither out of it. First, I sent copies of every fake fine, violation notice, and email to my lawyer. I also included a formal complaint about Linda's failure to provide financial records, her intimidation tactics, and her blatant abuse of power. Then, I forwarded everything to my buddy Mike, the fraud investigator. His response? Oh yeah, she's toast. Apparently, my little HOA had never filed proper financial reports with the county, which meant there was zero transparency about where the money was going. That alone was suspicious. But when Mike cross-referenced the HOA's account records, which he pulled through legal channels, with what little public information was available, he found inconsistent withdrawals. Money was coming in from fines, but where it was going, no one knew. That was embezzlement, plain and simple. And now, we had enough evidence to nail Linda to the wall. The next morning, I got a call from Linda. Her tone was dripping with fake politeness. Mr. Thompson, I see that you still haven't paid your fines. As I mentioned in my last notice, the HOA is prepared to take legal action. I smiled. Oh, don't worry, Linda. I've been preparing some legal action of my own. Silence. Then, excuse me. Well, here's the thing, I said, stretching the moment out. I requested financial records. You refused. I requested a hearing. You ignored it. And now, you've issued yet another fraudulent fine. That's a pattern, Linda. Her voice tightened. I don't like what you're implying. Oh, I'm not implying, I said, enjoying this way too much. I'm stating, you've been stealing from the HOA, and you've been using fake fines to cover it up. The line went dead silent. Tell you what, I continued. How about we talk in person? Say, tomorrow morning at the HOA office. Linda hesitated. Fine. Great. See you then. What Linda didn't know was that I wouldn't be coming alone. The next morning, I walked into the HOA office at 9 a.m. sharp. Linda was already there, sitting behind her desk like a queen on her throne. She folded her hands. Mr. Thompson, let's make this quick. If you... The door swung open, and in walked Mike, the fraud investigator. followed by 2 uniformed officers. Linda's face went pale. "What is this?" Mike smiled. "Hi, Ms. Cartwright. I'm with the County Fraud Division. We've been reviewing your HOA's financial records. We have some questions." The officers stepped forward. "And we're here to serve a warrant for those missing financial documents." Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. This is ridiculous." Mike pulled out a folder. "Is it? Because from what we found, you've been misappropriating HOA funds for years. Thousands of dollars in unexplained withdrawals, fines issued without cause, and a complete lack of financial transparency." I crossed my arms. "Oh, and don't forget the fraudulent towing attempt." One of the officers pulled out his cuffs. "Miss Cartwright, we're going to need you to come with us." Linda lost it. "This is a mistake. This is harassment. You can't." But the officers weren't listening. They pulled her out of her chair, slapped the cuffs on her wrists, and started reading her rights. As they dragged her toward the door, she whirled around to glare at me. "This is your fault," she hissed. I smiled. "I told you not to mess with me." And then she was gone. With Linda out of the picture, the HOA board crumbled. The treasurer, her little puppet, resigned the next day, claiming he had no idea what Linda had been doing, which was total BS. Mike's investigation uncovered that Linda had been pocketing fine money for years, using HOA funds to pay for her personal vacations, fancy dinners, and even home renovations. She was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. As for me, I was officially cleared of all fines. Not that I was ever going to pay them anyway. And the best part? At the next HOA meeting, the board voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. That's right. No more HOA. My neighbors were thrilled. Frank bought everyone beer, and Sarah, the single mom, actually cried with relief. And me? I finally got to enjoy my retirement, with my truck parked right in my driveway, where it belonged. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.